Your favourite films most definitely have a theme, an overarching concept that unifies the entire film, put in a nice wee bow with a few words on it that drives a message home to the viewer. That message may be anything as simple as love for yourself, for someone else. Could be good against evil, which sparks up an entire other conversation that could easily lead into humanity versus technology. But we'll stay at good against evil. Good against evil is by far the most common theme in film, and it's the easiest to visually see. Like for example, Marvel, because that's not relevant. No. In a Marvel film, I'll use the example of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, the first one particularly, because that's the one I watched most recently. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man is primarily a story that revolves around good against evil, as you have Spider-Man fighting Green Goblin. These two opposing ideals is what gives payoff to the story, and ultimately leaves the viewer satisfied. However, you would love to know that it's not that straightforward. There's another theme in Spider-Man, one that's more realistic and relatable, and that's the coming-of-age story of Peter Parker. This little dork-looking kid who's really awkward, can't talk to girls, gets bullied. Pretty much the epitome of lame. Hey, but that's intentional. The reason why I'm analysing this specific Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, is because the other Spider-Men are either too cool or their character arc isn't finished yet. And using the theory of identity essentially revolves around the idea that we identify with characters that are ultimately similar to us. There's a lot more you can delve into, but using the example of myself, I'm a little dork kid who's really awkward, gets bullied, but hey, I can definitely talk to girls. So yeah, I'm not the exact same person as Peter Parker, and no, I don't share all of his qualities. I don't live in New York, but I share enough to ultimately relate to Peter in some way, shape or form. And that's the most important thing in a story. You see a bit of yourself. It all ties into the coming of age story. Whenever you see the Peter Parker, the nerdy Peter Parker, come out of his shell and become a stronger character, you may not be there yourself, you may not be a spider, and you may not be a man, but you see a bit of yourself in Spider-Man. And the plot device that accelerates Peter's character arc is his Uncle Ben dying, this ultimately making him more relatable, because you see his struggle, and this is what adds to the eventual payoff. This is all really fundamental stuff here, and you can see the connections in most media you watch. But with the Spider-Man, it's the clearest contrast between the coming-of-age story and good versus evil, as the contrast is represented by a costume change. This brings us to today, and by today I mean December 12th, 2018. And I can't play that for copyright reasons. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a film that feels inspired, as this film is probably the precipice of everything that came before it. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a film that takes the same conventions the original movies had and brought it into the late 2010s in a way that oozed finesse and style. And that's best shown by our protagonist Miles. Miles is your stereotypical kid that grows up in Brooklyn, with his regular family, and his uncle, who we'll get into. I find Miles to be an infinitely more relatable character to me, because I identify more with the struggles that Miles go through, more so than I do Peter's. Like, Miles is a creative person that doesn't fit in with the expectations of those around him. And this is exuded from the first few minutes of the film. As we blitz through the Peter Parker exposition, learning his story, his achievements, and then we go to Miles in his room, listening to music, while his family are rushing him to school. We get a feel for Miles' personality through the music that plays, whether that be the Miles anthem in Sunflower, to referring to his foundations, if you want to call it that, in Familia, where it plays when he's going to school, probably pointing towards his family in Brooklyn, not his actual family, but those he's familiar with. And then the song Memories being an introduction to the father and son relationship, and Miles longing for the days when he was in Brooklyn Middle. The music is significant here because it does a good job at tying together the ultimate theme of the film, that being passing the torch to the new generation. Think about it, Miles' family, Miles' dad wanting him to go in one direction, an academic direction, Miles' uncle, a laid-back man who would let Miles be whoever he wants to be, encouraging his creativity. And then there's school as well, dumping all these expectations on Miles and hope he lives up to the academic juggernaut he's meant to be. In a regular Spider-Man film, you'd have the two lives of the protagonists split from each other, so each aspect of the overall Spider-Man character can develop. However, in Spider-Verse, it's subverted thanks to the wee dimension thing, and next thing you know, there are multiple Spider-Man. And speaking of Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man we're introduced to is the epitome of Spider-Man, the pinnacle, the regular Peter Parker. And no Spider-Man lives up to that in the film again, and it kinda gives a pseudo-power ceiling. But back to the whole dimension thingy, bringing multiple Spider-Man from different dimensions, the first of which we're introduced to being Peter B. Parker, an older, more depressed Peter who still has a Spider-Man ability. Second of which being Spider-Gwen, who's introduced later on. Then after them we have more characters I honestly don't care about, but they still drive home the main message of the film, of passing on the torch, and they also encapsulate the idea of expectations, another theme really visible in the film. As in the film, the plot needs it, so someone has to stay back and keep the portal open. The catch being, if the other Spider-Men stay in the dimension too long, they'll die. Using logic, it would be a job for Miles, however, time and time again, Miles has looked incompetent, and so he wasn't deemed eligible to take up the job. So it would have been a worthless sacrifice for one of the other Spider-Men to stay back, as they'd die. I presume this, coupled along with other factors in the film, is the main reason why Miles has an actual tangible character arc. Typically in Spider-Man films, the death is what progressed the plot in a serious way, and that's not different for Miles, as Uncle Aaron bites the dust. However, there's actually two people that die in Miles' arc, the original Spider-Man and his uncle. I don't know if it's bad to say or not, but I think the original Spider-Man is the main reason why Miles starts off so unequivocally bad. As the original Spider-Man is willing to teach Miles everything he knows, which would have made for a boring story, so bing bada boom, he's out of the picture, and now we have Miles, who is struggling physically with his powers and mentally with losing his mentor. And you add on the stress he has from real life. Ultimately it puts Miles at the bottom of the totem pole, and you can actually feel his struggles due to this one scene right here. He is terrified, and yet he can tell no one. Then blah blah blah, we get the Peter's tombstone, meet Peter B. Parker, and this man is not keen on teaching Miles at all. But he only comes around to it once he's forced to against his will. This scene is a visual representation of the skill gap between the other Spider-Man and Miles, and it all accumulates in one of the following clips where Miles straight up says he's scared of letting everyone down. Again, skipping past Aaron's death, which is used as another vehicle to push the narrative forward, we get this penultimate scene in Miles' dorm, which is the precursor to the payoff of all prior development. In this scene, there is a direct challenge given to Miles by Peter B. Parker, that being to get past him using his powers, except Miles can't get past and is left to wallow in his failure. This is where these two split lives meet again, and Miles' dad speaks to Miles and says that Miles can be whoever he wants to be, and then he leaves. And I don't know about you, but I interpreted this scene as everything holding Miles back finally let go. He no longer has the pressure to live up to the person his dad wants him to be, and he no longer has the pressure of living up to the Spider-Man moniker as he's been abandoned by them. It's only whenever the pressure is taken off of him that he turns into his own person, and ultimately his own interpretation of Spider-Man. And What's Up Danger starts playing, where Miles makes his own suit, sparing his own identity on top of the current Spider-Man, as the words of his family echo on screen, finally, before he takes that leap of faith, and finally, he becomes his own embodiment of Spider-Man, using the skills he's learned from the previous Spider-Man, on top of a movement style that is reminiscent of his late uncle. Miles has taken the torch and has ran with it, becoming his own Spider-Man, but more importantly, getting his own comic book, baby! Conflict defeated, and now the statement in the first minute of the film of there being only one Spider-Man,
there's only one Spider-Man, and you're looking at him,
is proved false by the final statement,
I'm not the only one.
as Miles goes to sleep. If you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, and that. I don't usually make videos like this one, so show your support by liking it if you liked it, and watch my other stuff. Thanks, bye.